Good morning. So happy to see all of you. Welcome to the National Book Festival. How many of you have been to a National Book Festival before? Awesome. We'll call you the groupies. How many of you have never been to the National Book Festival? We'll call you the newbies. And how many of you just love books and you love being at a book festival? Yeah, you are in the right room, in the right space. Well, we're going to have a lot of fun this morning, and I am delighted to be here. And I want to let you know that we will make time at about 15 minutes before we wrap up for you all to ask questions. So be sure to, as we're talking, be thinking of your own questions. And we've got 2 mics here. And I also want to let you know that Christina and Willie will be signing copies of their book downstairs in Hall B between 11 and noon. All right? Okay, now we can get started. I was like, and you all turned off your phones already, right? Excellent. All right, well, all right. We are here to talk with both Christina and Willie about their books, and I'm going to let them kick us off by literally telling us about your book. So, Willie, tell us about your book. And then I dig in, and I say things like, more about the characters, and more about the setting, and then I ask all other questions, but just start.
I mean, the idea... Jeez, that's a rough one.
No, we're in an elevator, and
yes.
Somebody says, so what do you do? And you say, I'm a writer. And they say, what have you been doing lately? And you say, in fact, my book, The Horse, let me tell you about it.
Well, I've been in bands since I was 11 years old. I started playing guitar, and I have been in unsuccessful to marginally almost successful bands my whole life. And then around, I guess about 10 years ago, I was like in my mid-40s, and I was starting to wonder why none of the guys even the guys I played with in high school never quit. Like, no one quits art. If you've painters that never show their paintings to anybody, and they just paint in their garage, and everybody thinks they're nuts, they still do it. Or, I was in punk rock bands, and then those guys get in their 30s and they're in bluegrass bands, or, pick up gigs in a calypso band. So I think I got obsessed with, why somebody does art. I never written about music. I had written 7 novels before that, and a bunch of failed ones. And I never once wrote about rock and roll. I had no interest in reading about rock and roll, really. And so I started thinking about, I'll write about why a person does art. And then the reason it's called The Horse is I was thinking about all those ideas, and I was driving through central Nevada, which I'm the representative of Nevada, my book is, which makes me really happy. Nevada's the greatest state, I'm sad to say, but sorry for you, rescue. And I was driving through central Nevada in the desert, and I came across a blind horse, a wild Mustang in the middle of a desert, like in a desert playa that was 30 miles from the nearest water almost, and it stopped me in my tracks. And so it was a combination of seeing that horse and me feeling like that horse from touring too much and boozing too much and all that stuff. So.
Love it. We're going to get it. We have so many good questions. All right, Christina, tell us a little bit about your book.
Oh my God. I mean, this is the question that fills me with like white hot panic.
Yeah.
To ask a writer, what is your book about? It's like, we have no idea. We wrote the book, but it's really hard to condense it. I don't know how long that book, it's like 400 pages, and trying to get it into a little nugget is difficult. I guess on one level, it's a book about the building of the Panama Canal, but told from the perspective of people you don't usually hear from when you hear that story. I was much less interested in the geopolitics, the engineering, any of the things you usually hear. I mean, if there's one thing everybody knows about the Panama Canal, it's like, it's the greatest engineering feat of all time. And I was sort of like, okay, but what else? What else is there? And I wanted to really explore the humanity behind the Panama Canal and what it was like to live through this monumental time. And so I just started thinking about, characters who would be placed in 1907 and what life might have been like for them. And I tried to write a novel about that, so that turned the narrative of the Panama Canal kind of on its head a little bit. And yeah, that was the idea, and I guess that's essentially what the book is about.
I think it's excellent. I'll have you know that the three of us had a conversation last week, and I did ask them if there were any questions I shouldn't ask or topics we should avoid. And I'll tell you, neither one of them said anything about that kind of question, being fearful. So I'm covering myself there. Let's talk about your characters just a little bit. So Christina, in your book, you introduce us to a number of different individuals. And do you want to tell us a little bit about any of them?
Sure. I mean, so this is a novel that started because I grew up going to the Panama Canal. My father is from Panama. I visited my family there almost every year. And we would often go to the canal and we would watch as ships would go through the locks. And, you know, I had no idea what to make of what I was seeing, actually. I had no historical context. We went there, but we didn't talk about it. I didn't know what it was. So when I came to write a novel about it, I was really just trying to understand it. But, you know, I write fiction, and I wanted to think first about the characters who would be there. And one of the things I learned early on when I was researching is, and this was quite surprising to me, is that of a workforce of about 50,000 people, only 357 were from Panama. I assumed that Panamanians actually worked on the canal, labored on it, helping to build it, and in fact that wasn't really the case. But being that I had a connection to Panama, that I'm half Panamanian myself, I really wanted to explore that side of it, and so I started with a character named Omar. He is a 17-year-old boy who was born and raised in Panama. He's very shy. He lives with his father. He doesn't really have any friends. They live out in this sort of isolated area. And now the canal project has started happening essentially in his backyard, which has brought this influx of people and all of this activity. And I thought, well, what if he's one of the 357 Panamanians who works on the canal? What if he's just drawn to it because it gives him purpose, it gives him community, it gives him something to do with his life? And so I started with him and this idea of him standing with a pickaxe in the mud with this, you know, other group of men trying to like actually carve through a mountain. And then the next character who was born, and these are really the two central characters, there's many characters in this novel, but the two central ones in my mind always were Omar and then this young 16-year-old girl named Ada. And Ada comes from Barbados, which was something else I had learned in my research. If Panamanians weren't the ones who were doing the labor on the canal, the next question in my mind was, well, who was? And it turned out that it was all of these people from the West Indies, especially from Barbados, but from Jamaica, from St. Lucia, from Martinique, all over the Caribbean, who had come to Panama to help build the canal. And I thought, well, what if I have someone from Barbados who comes then, and she doesn't actually work on the canal, but she comes for the same reason that so many people came, which was to earn money. It was called Panama money. You were going to earn Panama money. And then the idea was you would earn it and take it back home. That sometimes worked out for people, sometimes it didn't. But I thought maybe this girl would stow away on a ship, come to Panama to earn Panama money, and then she and Omar sort of meet, a lot of things start to intersect, all sorts of other characters were born, but those were always sort of the core characters for me. I actually wrote an entire draft just with the two of them, and then I gave it to my editor. I thought I was done. I was like, yeah, I wrote my novel, and I gave it to my editor, and my editor was like, no. It has to be bigger. That was like the one note, and by bigger, my solution for bigger was more characters. So it kept growing.
And your characters are contemporary to one another. And Willie, in your book, your characters are almost as if we're hearing about them through the lens of remembering them.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
There's really one main character in my book, and it's a guy named Al Ward. And I was interested in most of the guys I know that write, whether it's fiction or in this case, songs. Most of them are kind of damaged. And all the musicians you meet might not be damaged. Like the real muso school musicians aren't, but those guys that write rock tunes or folk tunes or country tunes often tend to be a little bit dented. And so Al Ward is a guy that grew up in my hometown of Reno, Nevada, and was kind of a beat up little guy growing up. And he happened to see, back in the 60s, 50s, and 60s, Reno had, bands playing every night in all the casinos. It was a bad place for musicians in the fact that you had to play cover songs all the time, but it was a great job because there was gigs all the time. And so working musicians from all over came and played in Reno. And he grew up playing that circuit. So it's basically the life story of a journeyman musician who has leaned on art, maybe his songwriting too much, and has always been kind of like, I always equate him to a guy that just got punched, and he's always kind of reeling. And so in that world, the other characters are all just all kind of people you meet, which I was interested in the idea of fame, like when you meet people like in bands that want to be famous, but at a real crude level. Like they might not be very good, they might not be doing very well, but they literally would like push their grandmother in front of a bus if that meant they could get a better gig. Like that kind of cutthroat, just insanity of wanting to be famous. So he's surrounded by those kind of people and surrounded by the people he understands, which are people that are more on the fringes or more little, what I'd call beat up. Yeah.
We get to know those characters through Al's memories of them.
Yeah.
And we also get to know about those characters and about what Al is going through song titles, because not only is Al a musician, but Al is a songwriter.
Yeah.
And Al comes up with some really amazing song titles. I'm just going to read a few of them. Can't you see I'm dying, Maxine? The all night, every night, Beaner good time rag, waiting for you to get off the bus. Susie, Wanda, Roy, and Lee, the police pull over on Christmas Eve. I won't let anything happen to you, and so on. There are probably, I don't even know, hundreds of different song titles throughout this novel. And through those song titles, we learn a little bit more about Al and the other characters. So I want to ask you about, so where'd you come up with all the song titles? Are any of these songs you've actually written as a musician?
I mean, I'm starting to whittle away at them.
That's good.
My band's latest record is called Mr. Luck and Miss Doom, and that came from a title. And that series was when he was older. He played in a band writing songs for these young Mexican guys. And so he was just listening to the stories they were telling and trying to, he realized that the casino circuit was dead, and so he started playing with these kind of punk rock Everly Brothers kind of guys, and he's like writing, but they couldn't write songs, so he wrote for them. So that was the most fun. All the bands he was in was the most fun. The hardest part was when you meet Al, he's kind of forced himself to live in exile. He inherits a mining claim in central Nevada, and he just gets tired of living the way he was living, and so he moves out to this old mining claim. And as anybody knows, I mean, when your world's not going well, your life's not going right, there's a tendency to want to isolate, and obviously to protect yourself, but then you're left with yourself, which can be the most dangerous thing of all, and left with your mind and your memories. And I think when you meet Al, he's in that quagmire where he can't stop thinking about the things he doesn't want to think about.
Yeah.
And that's that old thing, like you can't isolate when you're going down, and all you want to do is isolate when you're going down.
Yeah, yeah. Christina, you're nodding your head.
I was thinking about how each of those titles feels like a writing prompt. Like it's like, they're like a miniature story, and I was like, oh, could that be my next short story collection? I'll just take all your titles.
Please do.
Now I'll make
So
a story
great.
out of each
So
one.
great.
All right.
Then I'm done.
Yeah.
Then I'll be part of something brilliant for once.
I'll give
love
you a
that.
credit in there. Yeah.
Yeah, and he goes through, like, when he was, like, in the 60s, writing for a woman named Bonnie Bonneville. And then she goes through, like a sister act. And then he goes writes songs for a guy that sounds like Merle Haggard. And then, so he changes his persona by who he is playing with. He'll write whatever they want, so, within his own mind.
I want to ask you one question about the, there's a quote on the back of the book here that tells us, you know how the back of the book is supposed to be part of like the enticement, the thing that makes you want to read the book? I sometimes, after I finish reading the book, I read those quotes and wonder, what would the characters have thought of that description? So here's my question for you. So what would Al think of Joe's Hill comment that he says, "I love this novel so much, though it broke my heart again and again. No one anywhere writes with such power and such stark beauty about American desperation and want, American loneliness and heartache. We need Willie like we need Johnny Cash." Isn't that beautiful? That's like what he said about you. What would Al think about being compared to Johnny Cash?
He would say, "How much did you pay that guy?"
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, lucky. It's lucky when anybody likes anything you do. You're like, really?
Yeah.
Like, because so many years you do stuff and everybody thinks you're like, so you think you can write a novel? And you're like, well, I'm trying, or they'll go like, geez, you have a bad voice, or like, you like, just years of that. And so when somebody says something nice, you're like, okay, is this candid camera? And now you're gonna make fun
I
of
read
me?
that and I was like, I think Al would be over the moon having this relationship with Johnny Cash in this quote. It was great.
Oh yeah,
that's great.
It's a nice one.
Yeah.
It's nice. It made me feel good.
And Christina, I loved what you said just now about the song titles being like prompts for writing. Perfect. They also, in some cases, sound like they should be not just titles to a song, but maybe titles for a book. And we talked a little bit last week about your book titles. I want to talk about your book titles. So when you started writing, did you know what your book's title was going to be?
Oh, not when I started. At some point, you have to save the file on your computer, so you need some kind of working title for it. So you just like slap something on there. And I had gotten to the point where, so there's an area of the canal, the main excavation area, the Culebra Cut, and everybody just referred to it as the cut. I'm going down to the cut, we're gonna work on the cut, the cut, the cut, and I just put that as my working title, the cut. And so in my mind it took me 5 years to write this book, and so for like a good 5 years, that was the title that I had. It was the cut. And when it came time to submit the book to publishers, I looked at it and I thought, I don't know if this is like a winning title. So I added great. I said, the Great Cut. Okay, maybe that sounds a little bit better. And we submitted it with that title. And then after the book was under contract and I was working with my editor, the news came back that maybe The Great Cut sounded a little too violent. And so, in a way, I sort of liked that about it. Like, I liked the sort of like thudding, kind of like hard syllabic punch of it, right? So I sort of liked that, and I also felt like there was a violence involved in what has happened, right? They have literally cut through, as one of the characters says, the spine of the mountains, right? And to some of the characters in the book, it is perpetuating a sort of violence. It is like a wound in the earth that's never going to heal. And so it made sense to me in a lot of ways, but it also made marketing sense to me that they felt like maybe it was, too much in that direction. And they said, did you have any other ideas? And, all along, I don't know if you do this, but like I keep sort of a running list when I come across like a phrase. Sometimes it'll pop up in my mind. Sometimes it's something that's actually in the text that seems extractable. And I'll just keep a running list of like potential alternate titles. And when they said, do you have any other ideas? I sent them my like list of 20 other alternate titles, and everybody just was like, The Great Divide, that's it. And it did work in a lot of ways because, of course, the canal is this divide, but there's so many other divisions that are happening throughout the novel. I mean, you have this father and the son. I mentioned Omar before, so Omar goes to work in the canal, but his father, Francisco, who's a fisherman, is very, very skeptical of the promise of the canal, doesn't believe it's good for Panama. And so they're at odds throughout the book, and that's one of the divisions. There's a generational division between Ada, who I mentioned earlier, and her mother, and their view of what sort of freedom means in the world. And so there's lots of kind of fissures all throughout the book, and so it ended up working, I think, in the end.
Yeah, I agree. Good choice. How about the horse?
I mean, that was a title. No one, I'm not the smartest guy, and but I always have a lot of titles, and my titles are usually really long, and in my band they hate it because I like one title that stuck with them was once the freeway sounded like a river, and then $87 and a guilty conscience that gets longer the longer I go, and they hated it. So I always been trying really hard to make shorter titles, but really, the character Al Ward's in this kind of self-imposed isolation, and he wakes up one morning and there's a blind horse standing outside where he's living, and he's literally like 30 miles from a paved road, and the whole thing's about when you're drowning, you got to try to save somebody else who's drowned, and is the only way out generally, or a good way out. And so I just called it The Horse from the first day, and no one ever really liked the title. And then I was like, well, come up with a better one. I'm not proud. I'll take it. And that's the best way to get anything you want in the art world is just say, you come up with the title that's better than that. And then everybody kind of backs off and the phone goes silent.
That's good.
And so it made it all the way through. And then a buddy of mine goes, Jesus, man, you wrote another one about a horse. Because I'd written one about a racehorse named Lean On Pete. And I was like, oh, shit, I never even thought. And I go, maybe I shouldn't have written two about horses. But that one just kind of made it through. Yeah. I don't know, it's not a very exciting title, but
it works.
It does for this.
Yeah.
I think it does.
Yeah.
And
I like that we don't actually meet the horse until you're really into it.
Yeah.
And part of the joy of that is you want to get to know, like, where's the horse?
Well, it's that idea. I mean, one of the reasons I always just wrote for myself. I never thought of publishing books or whatever. So I write from a point of like, when I saw that a blind horse, I'm partial to horses anyway, but I saw this blind horse, and he was an old man. He had tons of scars all over him. And I was like, Jesus, man, I don't want to end up like that. Does everybody end up like that? And it put me in this crisis. And then when I got home, I said, I just want to be around it. And I want to be next to this guy, this old man dying. And so that's why I put him in there, is because I was like, I just want to, in my own way, hang out with this old man and make sure he's okay. So when you wake up from that kind of dream and you're like, well, I don't know if it's commercial or like anyone care about that, but I never think about that stuff. And then when somebody read that book, a buddy of mine, he goes, Jesus, man, why are you writing so close about your own life? And I was like, wow. I am? And he goes, you're crazy. And I was like, oh shit. But by then, by then the galleys were out, and you're like, oh, I guess I should have thought of that. So I don't think that way. I just kind of, yeah.
It's a story. It's fiction.
Yeah.
But I love the description you just gave of when Al sees the horse and is drawn to being helpful. I found myself, that theme presents itself in Christina's book too, which is part of the joy of literature, that we get to a similar place through totally different books. But there's a section, and the hard part about moderating a conversation is you don't want to give away too much, because really we want you to read the books. But there's this great, what Christina hadn't mentioned was that Ada, one of her motivations for going to Panama was her relationship with her sister. And she wants to help her sister out. So in this section, Ada and Omar are having a conversation, and Omar says to Ada, "You're trying to help," and Ada says, "But what if it isn't enough?" He felt a kinship with her, both of them carrying around their own private heartache over someone they loved. He smiled. "You saved me on the street, Ada," he said, "and if anyone can save your sister, I believe it's you." love that.
Thank you.
And that sense that part of what I love about that is just that exchange. But I also love that throughout both of your novels, we're getting to know the characters through their actions way more than through their words. And then there are these moments where their words are just so perfect. So, as you were creating your characters, did you find yourself relying on the descriptions you sort of had in your head about them, or were you thinking about how can I describe them? How can I bring them to life through the other characters in this book?
That's an interesting question. I mean, essentially, character development, how do the characters unfold and reveal themselves? So this is a somewhat mysterious process that's hard to articulate. But basically, like, what will happen for me, first of all, is that I can't get anywhere unless I have the language for it, right? Like, I can't start with an idea. I can't start with God forbid, you start with a theme. I can't start with a scene. I have to like actually know the language on the page before I can make my way into anything. So for character, that means I need to be able to hear them. So one of the easiest ways to do that for me is to get them in dialogue with somebody else as quickly as possible. So a character by themselves can be tricky, and sometimes it's helpful even extra textually, so things that won't even end up in the book, but extra textually to have them have an animal that they talk to, have a plant that they take care of, like be in relationship with something or someone. And when I can start to understand how they are toward that other being, then I can start to understand them better. So I sort of feel like what happens is I like plant a seed, right? Like I know, for example, like Francisco, who's Omar's father, is a fisherman. Okay, like I can start with that, but then I put him out on the water. What does he think about? What does he specifically see that anyone else in the world wouldn't see? What does he specifically notice? You start to like build that. And eventually I find like if I'm doing it right, if it's all working well, then I get to a point not too far into that seed planting where now things just start to grow on their own. And my job then as a writer is not so much to move the characters around and get them to do what I want them to do, as it is to listen to whatever they're telling me. I mean, this sounds like so like new agey and weird. But it's sort of to listen to what they're telling me and then follow them. So it's like, it's less that I'm sort of the puppet master who's like manipulating everything. And I always tell students, I'm like, don't write to tell the story, write to find the story, right? So like I'm like dropping little things, but then I'm just on the lookout kind of. And I can hear then, again, if it's working well, there'll be like a line of dialogue I might write, but it will like immediately clang. It's like, no, he would not say that. And I know that by now because of the like foundation that I've laid down. And I can stop and listen, like what would he say in this instance instead? Like this character that I have built, what would he specifically say? And then I can get a line dialogue. All right, that feels right. Now move on from there. So it's like this feedback loop, and you're listening to them, and you're really not in control so much as you would think. I used to hate it when authors would talk like this, but it's like, but now that I've actually experienced that, and it is the, I don't know, to me, those are like the best days of writing. Like there are certain days, sure, where like all you're doing is like, I need to get this character to move across the room. Like I'm gonna spend the next 3 hours figuring out how to do that, and like it's just sort of logistical, mechanical, whatever. But the really magical days are the days when the characters are saying something to you and you're just following them.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's very cool. That's very cool. You want to say anything about that?
I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Which is, did you really write by hand?
I did.
So why'd you write by hand? Because you're such a good, like, I don't know if the word stylist, but you're so good with language. It seems like you would be tinkering a lot, so it just comes out like that.
No, I was tinkering by hand though. No, I wrote by hand actually partly to be able to hear the characters better. It gave me a different level of intimacy. So this was a new situation for me. I wrote my first 3 books on a computer, and I switched to writing by hand for this book, and it was kind of a revelation. I switched not necessarily by choice. It was because I was really stuck, and it's a long story. Maybe it's too long for right now, but I was really stuck on what to do, and a way out of it I discovered was to be able to write by hand. And it gave me a different relationship with the words, with the language, with the characters. I was writing this book a lot during the pandemic, and all my kids were home for school, and the house was sort of chaos. And so I switched my writing schedule, and I would get up at like 5:30 a.m., and I would sit, and it was still dark outside, and I would turn on a lamp, and it was just me and the notebook and a pen, and I would like hunch down very close to the paper, and I would just like write, and I felt not only like physically close to the characters, but I felt like psychically close to them in a way that I don't think I could have gotten out of the computer. And so that was important, among many other reasons that I learned to love writing by hand. But yeah, I have these crazy notebooks that are like unlined. So I write like not in an orderly fashion. Everything's like diagonal, and then I like turn it around and like write down the side, and then there's like an arrow this way, and then I have to I get to come up with this elaborate numbering system so that I could keep track of where everything was and what I was doing. And it's like a very thorny thicket on the page. And somebody looked at it once and was like, "It's your brain on paper."
It's
and
so
I was like,
great.
"Yes, it is. That is
So great.
Yeah, the representation of my brain."
Yeah, I love that you write by hand. In the Library of Congress's collections, in the manuscript division, there are lots of correspondence files and lots of files that include people's speeches and notes. And when there are handwritten comments, or when they're all handwritten, you have a different relationship with that writer. That's cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. You might be inspired to start writing by hand.
No,
Where do you write? What do you use?
I started writing by hand when I first started, because no one had computers, home computers or whatever. And I hated, I was so ashamed like I wasn't very good at it, and I was ashamed to even be a writer, and I'd written a lot of songs. I started writing stories at like 18, but I'd written a lot of songs. And what I realized was in my mid-20s, the crazy thing is I had this job, and I had to fill up all the trucks at the end of the night at a credit card gas station. And I found an envelope with $4,000 in it. And it was the craziest thing. And I hid the money in a speaker.
I hid the money in a speaker. It could be a song.
And for like 6 months, because I was waiting, and it had a phone number. And it's Reno, so you're not really sure what it is. So I asked the most honest guy I knew. I said, "Should I call the number?" He goes, "Yeah, you got to call the number." So I called the number, and they didn't know who I was, or they weren't missing any money or whatever. And so I said, "I'll wait 6 months, And so I waited 6 months, and then I was stealing 20 here and 20 there, but and generally I was keeping it. And then when the 6 months came up, I go, "Well, I can buy a computer, and then I can make all my bad sentences disappear." So I had the box of bad, and so then when I'd start each day, I didn't see like all the pages of horrible sentences and bad stories.
So funny.
And then I did the opposite with songs. I started writing in a notebook with a pen. So I'd go, "Oh man, it takes me 11 tries to get the song where I thought it was right." So remember that it takes a long time to get anywhere. Mm-hmm. And then, so for me, it's always been about building confidence. Like confidence has always been my tricky thing. And so for me, the computer's heaven, because then I can make all the bad stuff go away. And I for as simple a writer as I am, I'm not that good at it. And so I have to tinker a lot. So I might write a draft in 6 months and then spend 3 years editing a 200-page novel. And so doing that by computer is heaven. But I wish I was her like writing beautiful sentences in the middle of the night. But I'm sleeping, and then I wake up and go, you can't do it. What are you doing with your life?
So you delete some of the things then to get rid of the bad sentences? That's what when you're on the computer, if you don't like, you delete it?
Well, I'll put it in the bad file.
Okay,
I'll save
good.
it, but I never
Yeah,
look
yeah,
at
yeah.
it.
That's
Save
what
it.
I
You
do.
gotta save
It's
it.
like looking at bad relationships, you know,
Yeah.
like looking at like a bad short story of mine. I'm like, God, you really are bad. And
Yeah.
so it's a quagmire. I never look
No,
back.
I have like a notes file
Yeah.
that's like everything that gets cut just moves to the notes file.
And do you ever look through the?
I mean, sometimes I need to retrieve something, but I try really hard not to look at it
Yeah.
because like that's the really bad stuff. But it's amazing because like my notes file for my last 2 books, the notes file is twice as long as the published book.
Yeah.
Like I wrote
cool.
that much more
Love that.
that never saw the light of day.
Yeah, I cut 200 pages out of this little novel.
Yeah.
Because I tend to take like the Bugs Bunny thing. You take a wrong turn in Albuquerque. Jesus, I've done that with every book. I'm like halfway through, and I'm like, maybe I'll go left. And your whole
Wrong
being
way.
is saying, go right, man.
way.
It's going to be because writing's like digging a ditch. You're like, it
Yeah.
takes a long time to get there, and so you can't just like take a left and see what's down there and then haul back
Yeah.
and start right again. You're down there for a year and a half going,
Yeah.
I knew it was a bad idea. I knew it. And then you just wake up and cut it and put it in your notes file.
Yeah, that's so right.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Writing a novel's like digging a ditch. It's another title.
Without knowing where
I
you're
know
going.
it, without knowing where you're going. I love it. I love it. So you keep a notes file, and you keep a. Do you keep an idea file?
No. I don't have that many ideas. I really don't. Like again, I don't start with ideas. I wish I had ideas. Maybe that would make it easier. I don't know. I start because I usually start either again because I hear like a fully formed sentence will just arrive one day, like a little gift.
Yeah.
I don't know where it
Yeah.
comes from, but it's there, and it feels fruitful enough to move on. And by fruitful, I mean normally if you have a first sentence, if there's questions that are sort of embedded in it, that's a really good sign,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, the first line of my previous book was, we heard they were from Mexico. And it's like, okay, well, who's the we? Who's the
good.
they?
Yeah.
Are they from Mexico? Where are they? Like, it was just like
Right.
a million questions.
Yeah.
Just,
Love
and I
it.
could see them sort of like
Yeah.
bubble up. And it was like, okay, which one am I going to answer? And then you start moving
Yeah.
in a direction. So sometimes it'll just be a piece of language that arrives fully formed like that. But a lot of times it's about just paying attention, really, to the world,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that
Yeah.
sounds very simple, but walking around the world and really noticing things and processing them. And sometimes, I don't know, it's like the energy of the whole world is like potential waiting to become kinetic, right? And if I can receive it, it's like, okay, I can write that.
I can do something
Yeah,
with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, because
good.
I do it totally by theme.
Yeah.
Like I just think about ideas. Like I'll think about weakness. You know, a weakness in somebody. Like how men and women say process weakness. How a man's weak versus how a woman's weak. How weakness gets you in trouble, and then I'll write a whole story around that idea. So that's kind of so I never
We
think
should
of my-
swap and see what happens.
If I could write
See
like
what
you, I would.
happens.
Sure,
Yes,
give her
man.
some ideas.
I would like to
right?
write some beautiful sentences once in a while.
That's great. Oh, I love it. Okay, so you've been talking a little bit about that magic and that moment, and there's a section in The Horse where Al is talking about songwriting, and it's very much in this sort of vein of writing, and I just love this, and I love that this idea is in this book, but Christina was just talking about it. I just think that's cool. So he's talking about songwriting. He says, but once in a while you get lucky. There's a guy, I can't remember who, but he said that when you write a good tune and you know it's good and you haven't played it for anyone, it's like holding hope in your pocket. And the hope has a heart that's beating, and it rushes through you and all around you. For a moment, You're proud of yourself because you have this little bit of gold that no one's heard, and you're the only guy in the world that knows it, or feels it, or knows how good the tune is. That's the best feeling.
That is amazing.
Marvelous. Isn't that
That's
great?
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that works for music. I think that works
This
for
is why,
literature.
yeah, people sometimes ask me like, oh, what are you working on next? I'm like, I'm working on something, but I'm not going to say, and it's exactly for that reason. It's like I'm holding it like a little secret, and I want to keep it mine a little longer. And I also, there's also a sense of if I let it go, the whole thing just sort of falls apart. It sort of shatters in a weird way, right?
Yeah.
Or somebody
Yeah.
says like, oh, that's a bad idea, or you know, I just read a book exactly like that.
Oh,
That kind of stuff. And so yeah, it's best
know.
to keep.
Those are like the nightmares.
Yeah.
You're working on
It's
a
like
book and you
shoot it
think
down.
someone else in the world somewhere is working on this same book and is going to publish it before I finish mine. Yeah, that's scary.
And I'm a like a people pleaser, you know, and so like if I never show anybody till like 3, like I'll be working on something for 3 years before I show anybody, and then if I show my wife, and because one time I showed her early on, and she goes, oh, you know that character Rick, I don't like that guy at all, and I go, really? I'll cut him out, and she goes, no, I mean I don't like him, don't cut him out, and I stayed up late at night going, I hate Rick too. So I cut him out of the novel, and she's like, don't ever show me anything again, you know. So I'm like that. So I don't show anybody out of insecurity, and I'll get swayed. And so usually I like to have something bulletproof, so then I know exactly why I'm doing it. And then if somebody says cut something that makes sense, I'll definitely cut it. But yeah, I'll change it so I don't show anybody anything.
Yeah, I try to keep it. Yeah, it's like a bubble on the tip of my brain, and it's just like very delicately balanced. And if I say it, it's like it's gonna pop. And I won't have it. I
And
don't
it's
know.
really fun to have something kind of hidden that you're, you know.
Oh, it feels nice. Yeah, I'm always like, I got something on the burner. You know, it's like that's
I
a
got
good
this idea.
feeling.
It
Yeah.
feels good. Yeah, I love that. All right. Our timekeeper is suggesting that maybe it's time for some questions from our audience. So if you have a question, you can make your way up to one of these microphones. And all right, very good.
Hi. I'm going to ramble a little bit, but I promise I'm going to get to a point. So because this panel is a little bit about place, this summer there's been a lot of weddings. So I've had to travel across our giant country and to many different parts. And just based on the varied terrain, it's dawned on me how silly it is that so often people are like, why is the US so varied in our perception of politics when even like, because the terrain is so different, I can't help but understand why people's perception of reality is so different, like even just by the environment. Like I grew up in Phoenix, so Southwest person, and it was interesting to me because I didn't realize how much like even just living in the desert, before that I like was living right off the Navajo reservation, and like living in that exposure really kind of forms you as a person. I moved to DC many years ago now, and I was in kind of a shock, not necessarily by the city, but by the fact that I couldn't navigate by seeing like mountains in the distance. Like that was how I could navigate, was by like natural landscapes. And then I got used to DC, and then I went on a European trip and then took a ferry across from the Netherlands to the UK and was in the middle of the North Sea and felt this strange sense of calm by just this exposure. And I realized that it felt like home because I realized what the West gave me that I didn't feel in DC was this kind of comfort in knowing that I was in a land where it wasn't a question of if it would kill me, but when. And I think that's kind of something really like your blind horse with the scars in the desert. It's kind of like that, I don't know, like that exposure. And I think that the environment can really shape you. And I think that's important in literature when writing about place. So I'm interested then, Christina, for your character, Ada, who comes from Barbados to like Panama, like how does that, is there like a confrontation that happens from like going from one environment to another? Is there an assumption of sameness or difference? Is there some harsh reality that is encountered? And then like, even if she makes this friendship with Omar, like how does that empathy then come in, or how does that relationship then form in like that environment, I guess?
Yeah. I think for Ada, she is explicitly in certain parts of the book talking about the experience of leaving Barbados, which is a place that she describes as like you can walk from one end of it to the other in one day, you know, and it's where she's lived all of her life. And there's some sense you see in a little bit of backstory, you know, the idea that's been fomenting in her about what it would mean to leave a place like that, what it would mean to see other parts of the world. And she's certainly like very much thinking about that as she leaves and boards this boat. And so part of her is going because her sister needs this surgery, she needs to earn this money to be able to send back so that her sister will survive. But there is a part of her that's excited, right, about the idea of leaving and seeing a new place and that confrontation with a new place and what will that be like. And she does talk about how much certain things seem just the same as they did in Barbados and how much certain things seem so different and so alienating to her. So there's actually quite a bit of navigation of that within herself, and you see that, I think, in the story and on the page. I think place is just something that I think about quite a bit. I was born in Delaware, but I moved around a lot as a kid. I moved to Miami, Florida, then to Virginia, then to Indiana, then back to Delaware, then to Illinois, then to Iowa, then to Texas, then back to Illinois. You know, like I think the idea of like displacement, finding a place, feeling like I belong in any space, thinking about environment and how that has affected me in different ways, thinking about the ways that I feel, as you point out, when I go to different spaces. Like when I go to Panama and I land there and I walk out of the airport, just the feeling of the air, the weight of the air, like all of that, right? And what it does to me, like the emotion that it invokes when I get there is quite different than when I like drive into Iowa City, which is also a place that I love, but I have a very different kind of relationship with that area, with that environment. Or like I went to Sedona for my 40th birthday and I was just like I was like, I'm ready to move to Sedona, you know, like this, like it was so real, beautiful. That feeling. And I think that is something that just as a human being moving through the world that I think about a lot. And so it's something that makes its way into my fiction.
Thank you.
Good.
Hi. I have a question for both of you. It sounds like in your novels, there's these deeply vulnerable moments and deeply vulnerable characters. And I was wondering, what is the process for you as a person and as an author to access that vulnerability and then put that into the characters? Because if there's one thing I know from old men and from teenagers, it's hard for them to open up and to be vulnerable. So how does that process come?
I mean, novels for me are like, or a beautiful song. Like say you hear a melancholy song that just stops you in your tracks. Like those songs you almost have to pull over because they hit you so hard if you're driving. I always wanted to write novels like that and songs like that because they save your life. If you struggle a little bit and you lean on that stuff to get by, like songs to get you through the day, or novels to be your buddies in your mind, it's life changing and it's like a life raft to you. You can live inside that to get by, and I did as a kid. So when I wrote, I said I might not be the smartest guy, but I'm going to write with blood. I'm going to write as close as I can to the bone because then I'll be the same as all the books and records that saved me. You know, maybe some weirdo kid will read one of my books and feel a little less like a weirdo kid, or hear one of the, some sad sack dude driving down the road hears one of my songs and goes, Jesus, man, that's rough,
awesome.
that's rougher than me, man. I feel a little bit better. So for me, that was the only thing I thought I had a gift with. I didn't have a gift with anything else, but I wanted to do that, to cut close to the bone on that stuff.
That's cool.
I think that you say like old men, teenagers, I think it's hard for everybody to be vulnerable. And I think that the thing stopping you is usually like some kind of fear of something, right? And so, I think similarly, when you're writing, the thing that can gum you up is some kind of fear, usually, right? And so I think as much as possible, getting to a place, for me, it's about getting to a place of writing without fear, or shedding as much of it as I can, right? To just, it's sort of like I'm letting myself go. Like I'm not there anymore, right? Like ego, be gone. It's more just about tuning into these characters in a way that feels as open as possible. And no fear for me often means forgetting there's an audience, forgetting anyone's ever going to read it. That was the other great thing about writing by hand, is it was a trick, right? It was like, I was always a journal writer, like in high school and stuff. And one of the great things about writing in a journal is I felt like no one was going to read it. Like it was my private place. And so when I got back to writing in notebooks, it felt so similar to that journal writing experience that it was like, it almost functioned as this trick, like no one's going to read this. So I can write anything I want. I can experiment. It can be as bad as I want it to be. Like it can do anything. And when you feel like that, I guess for me, which I think of as like sort of maximal creative freedom, what you're also getting is that maximum vulnerability, right? Because you're just willing to put anything on the page. You're willing to do anything there. And then that translates, hopefully, to characters who feel vulnerable, who feel open, who are able to receive other characters and the world around them.
Yeah, I think it is best to never think of anybody when you're writing. I never think of that, because I think it does kind of blocks you in a little bit. So yeah, I never think anybody's going to read it.
I feel like it like immediately corrupts your like purest impulses, right? Like when you said you write for yourself, I feel like that's actually like the best.
It's the most fun too. Yeah, if you start thinking about like, oh, you better write one better or more sophisticated, or then you just start like, then you're like, what the hell am I doing?
Right.
And then, so I cut all that off and just write where I want to go. And never,
and like you said too, like not thinking about marketing or like, I don't know. You're just like, you're writing the thing you want to write, and if you're lucky, that connects with people. And if you have written it with vulnerability and with heart and with blood, it usually surprisingly does connect with people, right? That's the thing.
And if it doesn't, you just throw it in the bad
in the notes file. Yeah, it's fine.
You cry in your pajamas and
There you go.
Move on.
and whine for a while.
More
and then,
great titles.
Yeah.
Love that. Thank you.
Thank you both so much, and you're both wonderful speakers.
Thank you.
That's a cool hat.
All right. We've got one more question in about 1 more minute.
Where did the Doña Ruiz character come from?
There's a character in my book named Doña Ruiz. She is a sort of fortune teller, soothsayer who lives down the street from Omar and his father. She came because I had these two characters who were totally isolated, living by themselves on this dirt road, and it goes back to what I said earlier. I needed them to have people to talk to. Right? Like I was sort of like, I've just got these people like by themselves. And I was like, well, what if they had a neighbor down the street? And so I put in this woman, and then I like planted one seed or another, and then suddenly she was like larger than life in front of my eyes. And she's one of my favorite characters in the book. I can't tell you how many times people bring her up to me. But she was surprising and wonderful, and I think it would have been quite a different book actually without her. She moves the plot in some really interesting ways.
Her and her hammock are my two favorite characters.
Just laying in her hammock,
Outstanding. Well, once again, at the beginning of our program, our colleague from the Washington Junior League, Christina Babcock, mentioned that both of these books were highlighted this year as Great Reads from Great Places, which is a program that has gone on now for 24 years, where our affiliated centers for the book all across the country select outstanding books that were written or have some connection to their state. And Willie's book was featured as the Great Read for the state of Nevada this year, and Christina's is the Great Read for the state of Illinois this year. And if you want to learn more about the Great Reads, right down that hallway to where all of our affiliated centers for the book are in the Roadmap to Reading, you can find one of these that gives you the whole list and the handy dandy little map that you can get stamped and eventually get a prize from our colleagues at the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Thank you all for coming, and thank the two of you, really outstanding.